Before an Amish family signs for a farm, someone digs a hole, 18 inches down, with a spade, in the corner of the field nobody photographs. That hole decides the sale. The USDA already dug it. Soil scientists mapped nearly every county and sorted the ground into capability classes, 1 through 8. It is public. It is free. Almost nobody opens it. The survey you pay $800 for tells you where your lines are. It never tells you whether your land works. Here's what that spade shows. Color first. Good ground comes up dark. Brown going toward black, and it breaks apart in your hand, like old cake, instead of holding together in a slab. That darkness is organic matter. It is decades of roots growing, dying, and rotting in place, and you cannot fake it. Buy it in a bag, or spread it on in a single season. Now the bad news, and it comes in gray. Gray soil with orange freckles running through it is the worst thing you can pull out of a hole on a property you are about to buy. Those freckles are iron that sat underwater, lost its oxygen, went soft and mobile, and then came back out again when the water dropped, over and over, for years. Soil scientists call that redoxymorphic features, and they are not a guess about what the land might do. They are a record of what the land already did, written in rust, every wet spring for the last century. The realtor is standing 40 feet away, talking about the pond. Then he smells it. Sweet and earthy means air's getting down there. Sour, like a puddle that has been sitting behind a barn, means it is not. And then the last thing, the one that ends more deals than anything on the listing sheet. He looks at the roots. Roots go down until something stops them. In good ground, they keep going past the bottom of the hole, thin and white and everywhere. On a bad parcel, they get to 12 or 14 inches and turn sideways, all of them, at the same depth, like they hit a table. They did. It is called hardpan, or a fragipan, or a clay pan, depending on where you are, and it is a compacted layer that water will not move through and roots will not break. And here's the part nobody tells you. You cannot fix it. Not with a subsoiler, not with cover crops, not with 3 years and a bank loan. You can nick it. You can improve the top of it. But that layer was laid down by geology in 100 years of somebody else's plow. And it will still be there when your grandchildren are arguing about the property. That and is one hole, 6 minutes. He also carries a quart jar, empty, with a lid. He will not use it today. Hold on to that jar because it comes back at the end of this. And when it does, it is going to explain something you have been looking at your whole life without seeing. Now sign one, and you can check this one from the road. Water leaves land in exactly one direction, and cold air does the same thing. Both of them run downhill. Both of them pool in the same low spot. That means the low ground on any parcel is doing 2 jobs against you at once. It stays wet longest in the spring, and it freezes first in the fall. Farmers call it a frost pocket. On a clear, still night, the ground radiates heat away. The air right above it gets cold. Cold air is denser than warm air, and it slides downhill like water and settles in the hollow. You can lose weeks off, both ends of your growing season standing in one. Same county, same zone on the map, same rainfall, 20 feet of elevation difference, and one spot is buying frost blankets in September while the other is still picking. Which brings up the thing that makes this so quietly expensive. The prettiest building site on most parcels is the worst one. It is the flat clearing down by the creek, ringed by big trees, with the view. It is flat because water put it there. Water deposits silt on flat ground, which is why it is flat, which is why it looks like the place to put the house. And that is where your septic drain field fails. That is where your basement weeps every March, and that is where the frost sits. The old-timers built on the shoulder of the hill, not the top, because the wind takes the roof, not the bottom, because the water takes everything else. The shoulder. Notice that next time you drive past a farmhouse that has been standing since 1890. Sign 2 is even easier, because the land writes its own report and leaves it out in the open. It writes it in plantings. Cattails, sedges, rushes, willows, and horsetail are not decoration. They are a water table announcement. Those plants grow where the water is close to the surface for a long stretch of the year, and they are so reliable at it that wetland delineators use plant communities as one of the legal criteria for calling ground a wetland in the first place. If you are standing in a patch of soft rush in August in a dry year, the water is closer than the seller thinks it is. Broom sedge tells you something different. That rusty, straw-colored bunch grass that takes over pastures across the southeast is a poverty grass. It thrives where the ground is acidic and short on phosphorus, and it wins there because almost nothing else will bother to compete. A field going solid broom sedge is a field that has been grazed hard, limed, never, and rested for years. And then the good news plants: stinging nettle, burdock, lamb's quarters. Those are nitrogen hogs, and they only get that big where the ground is genuinely rich. A stand of nettle, 6 feet tall, behind an old barn, is the plant world's way of telling you that livestock stood there for 50 years and left everything behind. This is the part that gets called folklore, and it is not folklore. It is the same information the soil lab gives you, delivered slower and for free, by something that has been running the experiment on that exact spot for 20 growing seasons. So a family walks 80 acres. Good price, good road frontage, nice stand of timber, and they walk away. Sign 3 is the one that feels almost like cheating, and it is the reason they walked. Somebody already solved this parcel. 120 years ago. Without a bulldozer, without a soil map, without a bank loan, and with everything on the line. Find the old foundation. Because think about what siting a homestead meant in 1890. You had a horse, a shovel, and one shot. If you put the house in the wrong place, you did not move it. You lived in it. Your children lived in it. So the spring went above the house, so gravity could do the work. The barn went on the drier rise, so the animals were not standing in mud all winter. The windbreak went on the north and west. The garden went where the frost came last. Every one of those decisions was made by somebody who was going to pay personally for getting it wrong. And in that 80 acres, the old foundation sat up on the rise. 300 yards from the flat clearing everybody else wanted to build on. The stone was still there. So was the answer. Then there is what is under the ground, which almost nobody checks. Across Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, and Michigan, there are millions of feet of clay drainage, tile, laid in the 1880s and 1890s. Hand-dug trenches, short lengths of fired clay pipe, laid end-to-end with no glue and no filter, sloped by eye. Whole regions of the Midwest were only farmable because of it. The Great Black Swamp in northwest Ohio was a wetland the size of a small state, and it was drained into farmland by men with spades and clay pipe. Here's the part that should stop you. A lot of it still works. There's tile put in the ground during the Cleveland administration that is still moving water today. And there is tile that collapsed in 1975, and the field above it has been quietly wet ever since. And the current owner thinks that is just how that corner is. That is a buried system running under a property you might buy, and nobody in the transaction is going to mention it, which is where this stops being about the Amish and starts being about the country. Because there was a moment when the United States took this more seriously than almost anything else it was doing. The first federal soil surveys went out in 1899. Small crews sent to map a handful of areas on the theory that the ground under a farm was a knowable thing and that the government ought to know it. By 1901, that work had its own agency, the Bureau of Soils. For 30 years, it was a slow, unglamorous, deeply nerdy operation. Then the ground stood up and walked away. Through the early 1930s, the Southern Plains lost topsoil at a rate nobody had planned for. Land that should never have been broken had been plowed anyway. The rain stopped, the wind came, and it took the soil east in clouds. The scale of it is difficult to hold in your head. Dust from Oklahoma and Kansas fell on ships in the Atlantic. The man who turned that into policy was Hugh Hammond Bennett, a soil scientist who had spent years telling anyone who would listen that erosion was a national emergency and not a farmer's personal failing. He had been saying it since the 1920s. He had been mostly ignored because you cannot photograph a problem that moves 1/8 of an inch a year, and because every farmer losing ground believed he was the only one. Then in the spring of 1935, Bennett was in front of a congressional committee arguing for a permanent agency, and the story that has followed him ever since is that he stalled and kept stalling because he knew what was coming across the country and roughly when it would arrive. The light in the room went brown. Dust from 2,000 miles away came down on Washington while he was still talking. He got his agency, the Soil Conservation Service, 1935, permanent and housed in the Department of Agriculture where he wanted it rather than parked temporarily somewhere else. And then the government did something that almost nobody remembers. It started buying land back under the Bankhead Jones Farm Tenant Act of 1937 and the land utilization program around it. The federal government purchased roughly 11 million acres of ground, not to farm, to stop farming it. This was submarginal land, land that had been sold to families who could not have known, land that had been plowed and had failed and would fail again for anyone who tried. The families were resettled. The plows came off. Much of that ground is what you now know as the National Grasslands. Read that again. 11 million acres of American farmland were formerly judged unsuitable, bought and retired, which means the judgment existed. Somebody with a spade and a notebook stood on that ground and wrote down what it could and could not do, and the government believed them enough to spend the money. That system never stopped. It is still running. It has a name, and it produces a number, and that number is attached to nearly every acre you can see from wherever you are sitting right now. It is called Land Capability Classification, and it runs from Class 1 to Class 8. Class 1 is ground with almost nothing wrong with it, and there's far less of it than people assume. Class 8 will not sustain commercial plant production at all, and that is not a scolding. That is a finding. Every step in between is a specific, documented list of what limits that soil, whether it is erosion risk, wetness, shallow depth to bedrock, or stones. And the classes carry letters with them that tell you which problem you have. AIW means wetness, and E means erosion, and S means the soil itself is the limitation. That letter is the difference between a problem you can drain and a problem you cannot. Your parcel has one. The one you're looking at on the listing app right now has one. The one your house is sitting on has one, and it was assigned before you were born. You have never been told what it is. You have never seen it. It was not in the closing packet. Your agent did not print it. The title company did not mention it. The surveyor did not include it, and I am going to show you exactly why not. Because the reason is stranger and more infuriating than any conspiracy would have been. So who decided this stopped being ordinary knowledge? Nobody decided. That is the part that took me the longest to accept, and it is worse than a decision. There is no memo. There is no lobby. There is no meeting where someone said the buyers must not learn about capability classes. What happened is quieter and more permanent than that. The knowledge was never assigned to anyone in the transaction, and so it fell through. Look at what you actually pay for when you buy land. A boundary survey is a legal document about lines. The surveyor finds the corners, checks the description against the record, marks the pins, and notes encroachments. That is the job. That is the whole job. A licensed surveyor is not evaluating your soil, your drainage, your water table, your septic suitability, or whether the flat spot floods, and they are not being negligent by leaving it out. It was never in the scope. It has never been in the scope. The appraiser is estimating market value from comparable sales. The title company is checking for liens and clouds. The agent is being paid a percentage of the sale price on closing and is not licensed to render an opinion on hardpan, even if they knew what it was. The inspector, if you hire one, is inspecting a structure. Not one person in that chain is paid to tell you what the ground is. This is not hidden. It is orphaned. And an orphan fact is more reliably lost than a secret one, because a secret at least has someone thinking about it. Nobody buried the test. The test just was not anybody's line item. And after enough decades of that, a thing that every farming family in America once knew turned into something you have to go looking for. Meanwhile, the people who never stopped needing it never stopped doing it, which brings us to sign 4. And this one reframes the whole question of what land is even for. Can this parcel give you water when the power is out? Almost no modern buyer asks. You turn a tap, and a pump you have never seen pushes water up a well you have never looked down, using electricity from a company you have never visited. Now take the electricity away, and the entire arrangement stops in about 4 seconds. So the question becomes depth, and depth is not negotiable. A simple suction pump, the kind with the handle you picture, cannot pull water up from much past 25 feet in practice. That is not a design flaw. That is atmospheric pressure, and no amount of money changes it. Below that, you need a cylinder that sits down in the well and lifts the column from underneath. And those can work at real depth, but the water gets heavier every foot, and so does the labor. Windmills have run that way for 140 years, and they are still going in West Texas today. So a well at 40 feet and a well at 400 feet are not the same asset. They are not even the same category. One of them is a property that can operate without the grid. The other is a property that is renting its water from the power company and does not know it. The USGS has water level data from monitoring wells all over the country, public, and neighbors will tell you their well depth if you ask, because it is the kind of number country people remember. Dependence has a depth. It is measured in feet. Almost nobody checks it before they sign. Sign 5 sounds like it only applies to the Amish, right up until you realize it applies to you harder. The buggy radius. A horse and buggy is comfortable out to about 8 miles and workable to 15. Past that, you're asking too much of an animal and too much of a day. So the geography of an entire people is drawn by that number. Church district, school, the mill, the family you help when their barn burns, all of it has to fit inside a circle you can cross and come back from. And here's where you see how seriously they take land selection, because the numbers are not small. As of the 2025 figures from the Young Center at Elizabethtown College, the Amish population in North America is around 411,000 people, in 684 settlements across 32 states and 3 Canadian provinces. It roughly doubles every 20 years. That is close to 100% internal growth. They are not recruiting. They are having children who stay. Now run that forward. Doubling every 20 years. On land. In a country where farmland does not double. That is why Lancaster County families have been moving for decades into Kentucky, Missouri, Indiana, Wisconsin, and upstate New York, and why the last 25 years added settlements in states that had none, including Colorado, Nebraska, New Mexico, South Dakota, Vermont, and Wyoming. Every one of those moves started with somebody walking ground with a spade, and this is the part that lands for the rest of us. They are not evaluating a parcel. They are evaluating a parcel plus everything within 15 miles of it, because land that isolates you is not cheap land, whatever the price says. If your nearest neighbor is 9 miles out and the nearest anything is 40, then every gallon of fuel, every school run, every emergency, and every friendship is being taxed by that distance for as long as you own it. Isolation is a property of the land, the same as drainage or slope. It just never shows up on the deed. And there is no line on the appraisal where anybody has to price it. Now sign 6, and this is the one I promised you at the start. The deal killer. This has ended more purchases than price ever has. The parcel passes everything. Soil is beautiful. Water is shallow. The old foundation is right where it should be. And the county says no. In 2013, Fillmore County, Minnesota, adopted an ordinance requiring most homes to have a modern septic system for the disposal of gray water. That is the water from washing dishes and clothes. The Swartz and Truber Amish families there are among the most traditional of roughly 40 Amish affiliations, and they do not have running water in their houses in the way you would understand it. Water comes in one line, hand-pumped, or by gravity from a cistern. They asked to be exempted. They offered an alternative, which was to run the gray water into large earthen basins filled with wood chips that filter it as it drains, a system permitted in other jurisdictions. The county said no. The county then filed a counterclaim, asking for an order that would remove the families from their homes, take out their possessions, and declare the houses uninhabitable if they did not install the septic systems within 6 months. The trial court sided with the county. The Minnesota Court of Appeals affirmed. The Minnesota Supreme Court declined to hear it. In July 2021, the case, Mast versus Fillmore County, reached the Supreme Court of the United States. The court vacated the judgment and sent it back for reconsideration under R. Oaks UIPA in light of Fulton versus Philadelphia. Justice Gorsuch wrote a concurrence going through what the county had argued along the way, including its claim that because the family sometimes used rubber tires or power tools, being made to install a septic system was not a real burden on their beliefs. 8 years. To decide where the dishwater goes. Now put yourself in it, because the ordinary version of this is waiting for you too. Your parcel is beautiful and the perk test fails, and no perk means no septic permit, which means no house. Or the setbacks eat the only dry building site, or the parcel is not in an agricultural district, and the right to farm protections that would have covered your neighbor do not cover you. Here's what it costs to check. Nothing. You call the township or county zoning office, and you ask what is permitted on that parcel and whether it has a recorded perk test before the second showing, before you are in love with it. Which brings us back to the jar. Sign 7. You've been waiting on this one since the beginning, and it is a quart jar with a lid. Fill it about 1/3 with soil from the hole. Add water almost to the top. Add 1 drop of dish soap so the particles let go of each other. Shake it hard, put it on a shelf, and go to bed. By morning, it has sorted itself into visible bands, because sand is heaviest and drops in about a minute, silt is lighter and takes a couple of hours, and clay stays suspended and settles last, sometimes over days. What you get is a striped column showing you the actual texture of the ground you are standing on. Heavy clay on top, thick and pale and slow to clear, means water is going to sit. Deep sand on the bottom means water is going to leave faster than your plants want it to. A jar with a good balance of all three is the one you want, and you will know it when you see it. That is the whole test. A quart jar, some dirt, water, and 1 night. That jar answers, for free, the same question the septic engineer answers for $800. The question the surveyor is not being paid to answer. The question the listing photos are actively distracting you from, and the question that determines whether your basement is dry in 20 years. And if you want the professional version of that jar, it is already done, and it is already public. The USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service runs the Web Soil Survey. You draw a box around any parcel in the country. It gives you the soil map units, the drainage class, depth to water table, depth to any restrictive layer, ratings for septic absorption fields and for dwellings with basements, and the capability class from I to Fate. Free. No account required to look. Generations of field scientists digging holes exactly like the one at the start of this, county by county, for over a century. Think about what that actually represents. Somebody drove to that county. Somebody walked that field, dug a pit, described the horizons by hand, took samples, and wrote down what the ground was and what it would refuse to do. Then somebody else checked it, county by county, decade after decade, through the Depression and the war, and every administration since. It is one of the largest surveys of a physical thing that any country has ever completed on itself. And its main use today is that a few farmers and a few engineers open it before they spend money. That is the buried proof. Not buried by anyone, just never handed to you. So here is where you actually are. You do not need 80 acres for this. On a quarter acre with a house already on it, the same 7 signs run in the same order, and they tell you where the wet corner is, why that one bed never grows anything, which side of the yard the frost hits first, whether the drainage problem is fixable or structural, and where the previous owner put the shed, and whether they were right. Every one of those answers is money. A failed drain field is 5 figures. A wet basement is a decade of dehumidifiers and a rotten sill plate. A well drilled 200 feet deeper than the neighbors is a number you will remember for the rest of your life. Dig the hole. Read the plans. Find the hollow. Look for the foundation. Ask the depth. Call the township. Shake the jar. 7 things. Most of them free. All of them older than the listing app, older than the mortgage industry, older than the idea that land is a photograph you scroll past. And I think the reason this feels like a secret is that being able to read ground used to be ordinary. It was not expertise. It was what everybody's grandfather knew. The same way everybody knew how to sharpen a knife. It did not get taken. It got left behind, one generation at a time, by people who no longer had to know it, until the only ones still doing it were the ones who never stopped. You are not most buyers. Most buyers look at the kitchen. You are the person who walks to the back corner of the property with a spade, while everybody else is standing on the porch talking about the view. So do it this week. Pick a spot, go down 18 inches, and tell me in the comments what color it was at the bottom, and whether the roots kept going or turned sideways. I read those, and the pattern across different states is genuinely something, because there is a second thing they check, and it comes before the soil. It is older than the soil map. It is older than the county, and it is standing along the edge of the property in plain sight, which is exactly why nobody looks at it. It is the fence line.